Welcome to the Fairy Frequency channel. Today I'm going to be reading to you from Exploring the World of Lucid Dreaming by LaBerge, Ph.D. and Rheingold by candlelight. If you've missed any of the previous chapters of this amazing metaphysical book, you can find them in our original playlist titled Exploring the World of Lucid Dreaming on our playlist tab. And we also want to remind you that we have a community tab too, and we look forward to interacting with all of your wonderful comments and suggestions over there too. So thank you for joining us. Remember, if you're new to our channel, please smash the like for us, the big red button, and the little bell so that you get all of our channel notifications. Today's chapter is Chapter 5, The Building of Dreams. Dreams are models of the world. This chapter presents a general framework for understanding the dreaming process. Since your dreaming head will be in the clouds, you should embark on your explorations with your feet on the ground. The basic task of the brain, as you read in Chapter 2, is to predict and control the results of your actions in this world. To accomplish this task, it constructs a model of the world. The brain bases its best guess of what is going on in the world on the information it is currently receiving from the senses. When asleep, the brain acquires little information from the senses. Therefore, the information most readily available is what is already inside our heads. Memories, expectations, fears, desires, and so on. I believe that dreams are a result of our brain using this internal information to create a simulation of the world. According to this theory, dreaming is the result of the same perceptual and mental process that we use to understand the world when awake. Therefore, to understand dreaming, we need to know about the process of waking perception and to consider how the functioning of the mind is modified by sleep. The construction of perception. Perceptual experiences are constructed by a complicated and primarily unconscious evaluation of sensory information. This process includes many factors beyond simple sensory input. These factors fall into two major classes: expectation and motivation. Expectation and perception. Perception, what we see, hear, feel, etc., depends to a great extent on expectation. In a certain sense, what we perceive is what we most expect. Expectation takes many forms. One of the most important is context. To see how powerfully context influences perception, time how long it takes you to read aloud the following two sentences. Form as to arranged, and the randomly quickly are example accurately words easier, meaningful, much, therefore words, sentence, these in, and then read, same preceding the. These words form a meaningful sentence and are therefore much easier to read quickly and accurately than the same words randomly arranged as in the preceding example. It probably took you longer to read the first sentence. This is because in the second sentence you perceived that the organization of words had meaning. Each word fell into a reasonable context, which helped you to see, understand, and read each word. While you read the first sentence, you had no help from the context of the words, so it took you longer to process them. It also is easier to perceive the familiar than the unfamiliar. Study figure 5.1. These are incomplete figures. until you have identified all three elements. How long did it take you to identify each of the three figures? You probably identified the dog first, then the ship, and then finally the elephant. This corresponds to the relative familiarity of the three images. The familiar, of course, is the expected. Another important influence on perception is recent experience. Steinfeld found that subjects who had been told a story about an ocean cruise identified figure 5.1c as a steamship in less than 5 seconds. Those who had been told an irrelevant story took 30 seconds to identify the figure. We expect current events to be like what has recently happened. Personal interests, occupations, and personality can strongly influence people's experience. This fact is used in tests like the Rorschach inkblot test that use interpretations of ambiguous figures for personality assessment. In a classic study of imagination, Bartlett noted that subjects asked to interpret ink blots frequently reveal much information about their personal interests and occupation. For example, the same ink blot reminded a woman of a bonnet with feathers, a minister of a Nebuchadnezzar's fiery furnace, and a physiologist of an exposure of the basal lumbar region of the digestive system. See figure 5.2. What does this ink blot look like to you? A bias of perception resulting from people's professions can also be seen with stimuli less ambiguous than ink blots. Clifford and Bull showed police officers and civilians several hours of films of a city street. Their instructions were to watch for certain fugitives, identified by mugshots, and for certain interchanges, legal versus criminal, etc. Although the two groups actually detected the same number of people and actions, the police reported more alleged thefts than did the civilians. Police obviously expect to see crime, and they do. Expectation biases perception in the direction of how you think things really are. Motivation and perception. Another important factor that influences perception is motivation. Our motivation are our reason for doing things. There are many different kinds of motivation, ranging from the most basic drive like hunger, thirst, and sex, to psychological needs like affection, recognition, and self-esteem, and finally to the highest motives such as altruism and what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization, the need to fulfill one's unique potential. It is like that all of these levels of motivation can affect perceptual processes. The influence of the lower levels of motivation is easiest to study. For example, in one experiment, children were asked to estimate the size of coins. When shown the same coin, poor children saw it as bigger than rich children did. In another experiment, when school children were shown ambiguous figures before and after meals, they were twice as likely to interpret the figures as referring to food when hungry than after eating. As the proverb puts it, what bread looks like depends upon whether you are hungry or not. Strong emotions motivate behavior and influence perception. You probably know from experience that angry people are all too ready to see others as hostile. The fearful will tend to see what they fear, even if it means mistaking a bush for a bear. On a more positive note, lovers will tend to mistake strangers for their beloveds. In general, motivations drive people to act to achieve goals or the satisfaction of some specific need. Having a motive or emotion biases your perception towards seeing things as you wish them to be. Schemas, building blocks of the mind. If perception involves analyzing and evaluating sensory information, then the brain must use some kind of matching process to determine what we are perceiving. Suppose, for example, you are presented with a somewhat ambiguous pattern of light. What are you seeing? Is it a bush or a bear, a rock or a pear? To identify it as any of these things, you must already have mental models of bushes, bears, rocks, pears, or whatever, to which you can compare the information from your senses. The best match is what you see. The same process applies as well to more abstract levels of the mind, including language, reasoning, and memory. For example, you cannot judge whether in a given situation someone has spoken tactfully or truthfully unless you have mental models of tact and truth. These mental models, called schemas or frames or scripts, comprise the building blocks of perception and thought. New schemas are created by adapting or combining old schemas, some of which we inherit genetically. They capture essential regularities about how the world has worked in the past and how we assume it will work in the future. A schema is a model of or theory about some part of the world. It is a kind of informal, private, unarticulated theory about the nature of events, objects, or situations which we face. The total set of schemas we have available for interpreting our world, writes the Stanford psychologist David Rumelhart, in a sense constitutes our private theory of the nature of reality. Schemas help to organize experience by grouping together typical sets of features or attributes of objects, people, or situations. These sets of assumptions allow us to go beyond the partial information available to our senses and perceive a whole. Exercise. How schemas take us beyond the information given. Number 1, read the story. To see how schemas guide understanding, read the following story and imagine it happening before reading any further. Nasruddin walked into the shop and asked, "Have you ever seen me before?" "Never in my life," answered the shopkeeper. "In that case," replied Nasruddin, "how did you know it was me?" List everything you know for certain about what happened. After having observed the story in your mind's eye, make a list of everything you know with absolute certainty about what happened. In other words, base your list only on the information explicitly given in the story. As Dragnet's Joe Friday was fond of saying, "Just the facts, ma'am." You may refer back to the story at any time. Take as long as necessary to complete the list, 5 minutes or so. To get you started, finish the following list on your own. Number 1, Nasruddin walked into a shop. Number 2, Nasruddin asked a question. Number 3, the shopkeeper answered the question. Number 4, and so on. Number 3, list everything you can plausibly infer about what happened. Now list everything you can plausibly assume or infer about what happened in the story. Be aware of the basis for each of your assumptions. You may refer back to the story at any time. You should be kept busy for at least 5 or 10 minutes without running out of plausible assumptions. You may stop at any time, but be sure that you have listed at least a dozen inferences. Here's a start. A. Nasruddin is a man. 2. The shopkeeper was not blind. 3. Nasruddin walked on 2 legs. 4. The shopkeeper was not lying. Commentary. Your list of inferences should be much longer than your list of directly observed facts. You probably listed all the facts you could think of, but gave up listing inferences when you realized you could go on forever. We assume a great deal about the world, much more than we observe about it directly. Notice how much you automatically assumed about the story. Your shop schema leads you to assume that the shopkeeper is in the business of selling something, probably goods, but possibly services. Then the shop was illuminated either by sunlight or some sort of lamp, and the shop likely had walls, a ceiling, 1 or more doors, and possibly windows, and certainly a floor. That the shop had a means of approach, a street or a path, and was probably situated in the business section of town. Your social behavior schemas allow you to assume that Nasruddin probably walked through a door rather than a window, that he addressed his question to the shopkeeper rather than to someone else, that the shopkeeper and Nasruddin had never met, that they were both speaking the same language during their interchange, and so on. General reality orientation schemas result in the assumption that the law of physics were operating as usual, that gravity was present, that the door probably squeaked, that Nasrudin is not the shopkeeper, and that he wasn't therefore talking to himself, that Nasrudin is not a talking dog, and finally, limited by creativity and stamina, that Nasrudin was serious at the same time as he was joking. Schemas for everything. You probably discovered while doing the preceding exercise that schemas have much in common with the notion of stereotype. You may have unconsciously assumed, for example, that the shopkeeper was male. You also may have noticed that schemas aren't normally subject to conscious inspection. We aren't usually conscious of the schemas we are employing. For example, the particular rules we are following in a given social situation. We merely perceive what kind of situation we are in, formal, friendly, intimate, etc., and act accordingly. Proper, expected conduct is automatically defined as a part of the particular schema. So if you perceive that you are at the opera, your opera schema causes you to sit quietly in your seat rather than walking up and down the aisles. You are probably convinced by now that there are schemas for everything, just as theories can be about the grand or the small, writes Rumelhart. No schemas can represent knowledge at all levels, from ideologies and cultural truths to knowledge about what constitutes an appropriate sentence in our language to knowledge about the meaning of a particular word to knowledge about what patterns of sound are associated with what letters of the alphabet. Schemas are connected to one another. A certain schema, such as spectator at an opera, automatically brings into play a great number of other schemas. For example, you will identify the woman dressed in regal clothing on stage as a singer rather than some sort of royalty. Schema activation. So far, we have described schemas in purely psychological terms, but they are presumably embodied in the brain by the networks of neurons. Current theory favors the idea that the extent of which a schema is working to organize experience is determined by the degree of activity in its respective neural network. Freud believed the mind to be divided into three parts: consciousness, preconsciousness, and unconscious. Preconscious and unconscious. In these terms, the activation of schema above a critical threshold results in a conscious experience. Schemas with too little activation to influence any other schemas remain unconscious. Those with insufficient activation to influence the activation of other schemas, but insufficient activation to themselves enter consciousness, are part of the preconscious mind. An example will clarify these terms. Consider a word representing a schema which is probably not currently activated in your mind: ocean. Until you read this word, your schema for ocean was probably lying dormant in your unconscious mind, along with many other schemas that you associate with the ocean. Now, however, you have ocean well activated above your threshold for consciousness. Your ocean schema probably brought several other schemas along with it into consciousness, such as fish, seagulls, and a seashore. You may have thought of the proverb, "Only call yours what cannot be lost in a shipwreck." In addition to raising several schemas to consciousness, the word ocean has also activated some schema to the preconscious level. These are schemas for things that you associate with the ocean, though perhaps not as closely as the things that immediately came to mind. For example, your schema for ship was probably at least slightly activated, though now it is in your conscious mind. Even if you didn't consciously think of ships, subconscious activation of your ship schema could be demonstrated by showing you figure 5.1c. Like Steinfeld's subjects who had been told a story about an ocean cruise, you should quickly recognize the figure as a ship. Thus, schemas do not have to be in consciousness to affect your behavior. A model of dreaming, the building of dreams. I suggested that dreams are simulations of the world created by our perceptual systems. The introduction to waking perception that you have just read will help you understand this theory. Consider, first of all, how sleep modifies the process of perception. During REM sleep, as you learned in Chapter 2, sensory input from the outside world and body movement are both suppressed, while the entire brain is highly active. The activity of the brain raises certain schemas above the perceptual thresholds. These schemas enter consciousness, causing the dreamer to see, feel, hear, and experience things not present in the external environment. Ordinarily, if you were to see something that wasn't really there, contradictory sensory input would rapidly correct your mistaken impression. Who doesn't the same thing happen during dreaming? Sorry, why doesn't the same thing happen during dreaming? The answer is because there is little or no sensory input available to the brain for correcting such a mistake. What we are likely to dream about. Our experience in dreams is determined by which schemas are activated above the threshold for consciousness. But what determines which schemas are activated? The same processes that influence waking perception, expectation, and motivation. Expectation shows itself in dreams in many ways. When we construct a dream world, we expect that it will resemble past worlds that we've experienced. Thus, dream worlds are almost always equipped with gravity, space, time, and air. Likewise, recent experience influences dreaming in the same way it influences waking perception. Freud called this day residue. Personal interests, preoccupations, and concerns influence dreaming as well as waking perception. The minister who saw Nebuchadnezzar's fiery furnace in an inkblot might well dream about the mad king of Babylon. Likewise, remember the study which found that police officers were more likely than civilians to expect and therefore see crimes that weren't there. Which group do you suppose would be more likely to dream about crime? Motivation and emotion strongly influence waking perception, and we would expect the same for dreaming in particular. You are likely to dream about what you desire, wish fulfillment dreams. Suppose, for example, that you have gone to bed without your supper. Like the hungry school children who were likely to interpret ambiguous figures as food, you will be likely to dream about food. Freud was so impressed by the prevalence of wish fulfillment in dreams that he made it the cornerstone of his entire theory of dreams. According to Freud, every dream is the fulfillment of a wish. However, this appears to be overstating the case. Nightmares are obvious counterexample. Indeed, just as fear makes you more jumpy, that is, ready to interpret ambiguous stimuli as danger when awake, it has the same effect in dreams. This is probably why people dream about unpleasant and even horrible situations. The reason is not as Freud believed, because they are maso- masochistic and unconsciously wish to be frightened. Much likely it is because they are afraid of certain events, and therefore, in a sense, expect that they may happen. You can't be afraid of ghosts if you don't believe in ghosts. Why dreams seem like stories? By this account, you might expect that dreams would be sequences of disconnected images, ideas, feelings, and sensations, rather than the intricately detailed and dramatic story-like sequences that they often are. However, I believe that schema activation can also account for the complexity and meaningfulness of dreams. To see how, look back at how many more inferences than observations you derived from schemas in the exercise on how schemas take us beyond the information given, page 123. The exercise showed you how a few general purpose schemas can generate a vast amount of meaningful detail. Give a schema a dot and it will see a fly. Give a sleeping brain an activated schema or two and it will make a dream. Some dreams have plots as coherent, funny, dramatic, and profound as the best stories, myths, and plays. After awakening from such dreams, it sometimes seems as if the significance of characters or events set up early in the dream became clear only in the denouement. This can give the impression of a complete dream plot worked out in advance. It is probably this sort of dream that gives people the notion that their unconscious minds have put together a dream film with a message for their conscious minds to watch and interpret. However, I think a simpler explanation is a story schema has been activated throughout the dream. The notion of a story schema may have taken you by surprise, but remember, there are schemas for everything. The story or narrative schema is a basic and universally understood part of human culture. Stories most typically occur as a sequence of episodes, which are typically divided into three parts: exposition, complication, and resolution. The exposition introduces the setting and the characters, who typically encounter some complication or problem that is finally resolved at the end of the story. Indeed, Carl Jung described the dream as being like a drama in three acts. Story schemas can specify sequences of events, timing of character introductions, patterns of dramatic tension and release, surprise, endings, and so on. It's not necessary to reify the unconscious mind in the role of dream director. Why dreams are meaningful. The view of dreams as world models is far from the traditional notion of dreams as messages. Whether from the gods or from the unconscious mind, I have presented arguments against the letters to yourself view of dreams elsewhere. Be that as it may, interpretation of dreams can be very revealing of personality and can be a rewarding, valuable practice. The reason for this straightforward. Think about the inkblot projection test. How is it that what people see in inkblots tell us something about themselves? Their interpretations inform us about their personal interests, concerns, experiences, preoccupations, and personality. Dreams contain much more personal information than inkblots because the images in them are created by us from the contents of our minds. Dreams may not be messages, but they are our own most intimately personal creations. As such, they are unmistakably colored by who and what we are and by whom we would become. The building of dreams. Two examples. The following two examples of hypothetical dreams illustrate several features of dream construction. Number one, dreams are products of an interaction between various parts of the mind, including the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. Number two, schemas, motivations, and expectations interact in the development of the dream. And number three, there is no predestination in dreams. Dreams respond as readily to the lowest as to the highest motivation, to expectations of disaster or ad astra. Dream version 1. I have just entered REM sleep, and the activation of my brain is gradually increasing. Within a minute, some schema reaches perceptual threshold. Let's say it's a city street schema that remains activated from my day's experiences. As soon as I see the street, I strongly expect to see myself on it, and I am there. Now I notice that it's night, and the street is dimly lit. This activates an associated set of schemas, previously unconscious or preconscious, relating to the dangers of being on some street at night, including the expectations of someone, perhaps a mugger, who is likely to do me harm. The same moment that this fearful expectation emerges, a shadowy figure appears across the street. Who is he? I can't see him well enough to tell what he looks like, but the thought crosses my mind that he could be a mugger I've heard about. And so he now is that mugger. He looks menacingly in my direction, so I turn around and start to walk the other way. I am afraid I expect he will follow me, and so he does. I begin to run, and he runs after me. I try to lose him, going up and down various streets and alleys, but somehow he always finds me. Finally, I hide beneath some stairs and feel safe for a moment. Then I think, but maybe he'll find me here too. And he does. I awake in a sweat. Dream version 2. I have just entered REM sleep, and the activation of my brain is gradually increasing. Within a minute, some schema reaches perceptual threshold. Let's say it's a city street schema that has some residual activation as a day residue. As soon as I see the street, I strongly expect to see myself on it, and I am there. Now I notice that it's night, and the street is dimly lit. The experience of being on a street at night activates other schemas related to this experience. The one that comes to the fore is the idea that I must be on my way to a movie. I see a shadowy figure down the street. I can't see him or her well, but the movie schema encourages me to believe that this is a friend that I am meeting before seeing the film. When I get closer, I see that it is indeed my friend. We walk on down the street toward the theater. The street is now clearly one I know well. I seem to have forgotten what film we are to see, and I peer at the marquee. Some part of my mind must be aware that I am dreaming. The dream schema is activated because I see that the marquee reads The Last Wave, a film about dreaming. Since I've seen the movie dozens of times, I wonder why I'm going to see it again. I look back at the marquee, and now it reads Dream or Wake. I cannot miss the unmistakable clue. I now am fully conscious that I am dreaming. My friend has disappeared while I was pondering the dream marquee. I take off into the sky and soar, knowing that gravity schema is not applicable. Mental constraints of dreaming. Assumptions can be dangerous. As we've seen, schemas are theories embodying assumptions about the world. If your assumptions are mistaken and as a result your schema fails to model the world accurately, what should happen is a process of theory revision and schema modification, and schema modification that the renowned psychologist Jean Piaget called accommodation. Your accommodated schema will now better fit the facts, and you will have slightly more knowledge than you did before. If we always accommodate our schemas to new information, our worlds will continuously expand as our schemas become increasingly comprehensive, adaptable, and intelligent. Unfortunately, people don't always accommodate their schemas in the face of new information. We may not even see the new information, exactly because it doesn't fit the assumptions of our schemas. Instead of noticing the discrepancy, we distort it. In Piaget's terminology, assimilate our perception of the real event or object to fit the schema. The difficulty of accurate proofreading illustrates this phenomena. Or if we do see that something doesn't quite fit, we may regard the discrepant feature or features as irrelevant or defective. Consider the story in which Nasruddin, the foolish mullah, whom the Sufis used to illustrate common human errors, finds a king's hawk sitting on his windowsill. He has never seen such a strange pigeon. After cutting its aristocratic beak straight and clipping its talons, he sets it free, saying, "Now you look more like a bird." Just as Nasruddin cut off the hawk's most prominent features because they didn't fit his bird schema, we may suffer from the same self-perpetuating myopia when we attempt to reduce new concepts to fit our current understanding. Incidentally, one of the functions of Nasruddin's tale and other Sufi stories is to provide schemas for seeing ourselves in new ways and to provide a basis for eventual development of higher perception. The general set of schema guiding our ordinary waking experience also governs our ordinary dream state. We tacitly assume in both cases that we are awake, and our perceptions during dreaming are distorted to fit this assumption. When bizarre dream events occur, we sometimes somehow assimilate them into what we consider possible. If we happen to notice or experience them as unusual, we are usually able to rationalize them. If you want to become a lucid dreamer, however, you must be prepared to accept the possibility that a strange pigeon may be a bird of an altogether different feather, and that sometimes the explanation for anomalies is that you are dreaming. Importance of expectation in the building of dreams. Your expectations and assumptions, whether conscious or preconscious, about what dreams are like, determine to a remarkable extent the precise form your dream takes. As I've said, this applies to your waking life as well. As an example of the effect of assumed limitations on human performance, take the myth of the 4-minute mile. For many years, it was believed impossible to run that fast until someone did it, and the impossible became possible. Almost immediately, many others were able to do the same. Assumptions play a more important role during dreaming than waking perception. After all, in this physical world, there are actual limitations built into our bodies, not to mention the constraints of the laws of physics. Although the barrier of the 4-minute mile was not insurmountable, there are absolute limits to human speed. With the bodies we have today, running a mile in 4 seconds is presumably impossible. In the dream world, however, the laws of physics are followed merely by convention, if at all. There may be physiological constraints on a lucid dreamer's action deriving from the functional limitations of the human brain. For example, lucid dreamers appear to find reading coherent passages virtually impossible. As the German physician Harold von Mowers-Messmers reported in 1938, letters in lucid dreams just won't hold still. When he tried to focus on words, the letters turned into hieroglyphics. Note that I am not saying we can never read in dreams. I myself had had dreams in which I have done so, but these were not lucid dreams in which the writing was being produced in response to voluntary intention. However, possible physiological constraints on dream actions are far fewer in number than those imposed on waking life by physical laws, leaving more room in dreams for psychological influences, such as assumptions, to limit our actions. If you think you can't, then you can't. The Russian philosopher Ph.D. Ouspensky believed that man cannot in sleep think about himself unless he thought is itself a dream. Man cannot in sleep think about himself unless the thought is itself a dream. Somehow, from this, he decided that a man can never pronounce his own name in sleep. In light of what we now know about the effects of expectation on dream content, you should not be surprised to hear that Ouspensky's reported, as expected, that if I pronounced my name in sleep, I immediately woke up. Another lucid dreamer studied by the English psychologist Celia Green heard of the philosopher's experience and theories and tried the experiment for herself. She reported that I thought of Ouspensky's criterion of repeating one's own name. I achieved a sort of gap in consciousness of 2 words, but it seemed to have some effect, made me giddy, perhaps. At any rate, I stopped. In one more demonstration of the issue, Patricia Garfield described a lucid dream of her own. In carving my name, I proceeded to do just that on the door where I was already carving. I read it and realized why Ouspensky believed it is impossible to say one's name in a lucid dream. The whole atmosphere vibrated and thundered, and I woke. Garfield, who was also familiar with the experience of Green's subject, concluded that it is not possible to say one's own name in a lucid dream, but it is disruptive. I too had read Ospensky's account, but I accepted neither his conclusion nor his original premise. I was confident that nothing would be easier than saying my name in a lucid dream, and soon put my belief to the test. In one of my early lucid dreams, I spoke out loud the magic word, Stephen. I am Stephen. Beyond hearing my own voice speaking my own name, nothing unusual happened. Evidently, Ospensky, Green, Subject, and Garfield had been strongly conditioned by prior expectations. Of course, the same is true for all of us. In dreams, even more than elsewhere in life, if you think you can't, you can't. As Henry Ford said, believe you can't, believe you can. Either way, you're right. And that is the end of chapter 5, The Building of a Dream. So I challenge you to ask yourself today, am I dreaming? Make a little card and put it in your pocket, and every time something unusual happens, ask yourself, am I dreaming? And by conditioning ourselves in that state of reality test, we will eventually be able to ask ourselves in our dream, am I dreaming? Thank you for joining us today. If you've missed any of the previous chapters of this amazing metaphysical book, remember you can find them in our original playlist titled Exploring the World of Lucid Dreaming on our playlist tab. And if you want more information on dreaming, you can also check out our collaborative playlist called Dreams and Visions for more details on how to help yourself get into the dream recall. Don't forget to come back and leave us a comment. And don't forget to check out our community tab, folks. Wishing you all a beautiful day. And don't forget to ask yourself, am I dreaming?